It began on a night I would never forget. The storm outside had lasted for hours, relentless rain striking the windows, wind shaking the old apartment. When I woke the next morning, exhausted and disoriented, I saw it. A wide, jagged smile painted across the wall opposite my bed. I froze. It was not a drawing, not graffiti, not anything I could rationalize. The lines were black, deep, impossibly precise, curling at the edges in a way that no human hand could have created in the dark. At first, I thought it was a shadow, something left over from the night storm. I touched the wall. The paint, if that is what it was, felt dry and coarse, cold to the touch, as if it had been there for months. Yet I had never seen it before. I checked the apartment thoroughly. Windows were locked, doors bolted. Nothing suggested a visitor. My neighbors were asleep or out. No one could have entered. I tried to ignore it. I thought perhaps it was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, too many sleepless nights, too much work. But as I moved around the apartment, it stayed with me. In the periphery of my vision, I could swear the smile seemed to widen, stretching just a little when I blinked. It was not static. It felt alive. By that evening, my apartment had changed. The air felt heavier, colder. Shadows hung in corners where there should have been light. I began to hear faint, almost imperceptible sounds. A soft scraping, a whisper of movement. I could not place it, but every instinct screamed that I was being observed. Sleep came in fits and starts, nightmares filled with blackened shapes and endless grins. I woke repeatedly, convinced the smile had shifted, though it was always in the same place. The next day, I asked a neighbor if she had seen anything unusual. She shook her head, concern knitting her brows. There were no children in the building, no artists, no vandals. No one had been in my apartment, and yet the smile was there. I tried to cover it with blankets, sheets, even furniture, but the image pressed through, mocking me, daring me to look. I began to feel its presence constantly. The apartment felt smaller, more oppressive. Every glance at the wall was met with that grin, stretching impossibly patient, as if it had been waiting for me all along. I realized I could not dismiss it. This was no prank, no mistake. Something had claimed my apartment, and it was aware of me. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the floor, facing the wall, counting the minutes, afraid to move. The smile seemed to shift subtly in the flickering light from the street outside. Sometimes the corners of the grin appeared sharper, teeth jagged in a way they had not been before. I could hear faint laughter at the edge of my hearing, a soft, echoing sound that made my stomach twist. I tried documenting it, taking photos and videos. On the camera, the smile appeared smudged, less defined, almost liquid, yet unmistakable. It was as if it existed only in my perception, refusing to be fully captured. I scrubbed the wall with every cleaning product I had, bleach, soap, vinegar. Nothing worked. The grin persisted, perfect, unyielding. The sounds intensified. At night, I could hear soft footsteps pacing the apartment, subtle movements that ended whenever I froze. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining the grin leaping from the wall to stand behind me. I began to sense it in mirrors, in reflections of windows. Something about the grin had become aware of me, as if it learned from my reactions, adjusting its presence to evoke fear. My neighbors began noticing things too. One claimed to hear whispers through the walls. Another said shadows moved unnaturally. I stopped speaking of it. I could not explain what was happening without sounding insane, and the grin seemed to feed on my terror, growing wider when I panicked, sharper when I tried to dismiss it. By the third night, I realized I could not sleep without seeing it. I began to monitor my own movements, testing its patience. When I stopped moving, the apartment grew silent. When I moved, subtle creaks and shifts echoed in response. It mirrored me, following a rhythm I could not break. I understood then that the smile was not just a mark. It was alive, patient, and it was waiting. The smile became invasive. It was no longer confined to the wall opposite my bed. It appeared on the inside of the closet door, etched faintly into the wood. On the bedroom door, it reappeared at eye level. I woke one morning to find on the bathroom mirror, smeared and wet, like someone had breathed on it to create it. I did not enter the room for hours, staring at it from the hallway, convinced that looking too closely would draw it closer. Sleep became impossible. The whispers evolved into laughter, sometimes high-pitched, sometimes guttural, always mocking. I could hear footsteps pacing at night, circling the apartment, following my movements, halting when I froze. I tested it deliberately. I stayed absolutely still for minutes, then hours. The apartment fell silent, suffocatingly so, until a subtle pressure on my back made me feel its attention, patient and calculating. I moved apartments, leaving the building behind, thinking distance might help. I was wrong. The smile followed. In the new apartment, on the first morning, a perfect replica appeared on the wall by the bedroom. I scrubbed, covered, ignored it. Nothing worked. It waited, patient, always waiting. I began avoiding mirrors, windows, anything reflective. I stopped going outside unless absolutely necessary. I could feel the grin in every room, every shadow, every reflection, always aware of me. It became an obsession, an invisible companion tethered to my life. It adapted to me, studying me. It learned me, and I knew it would never leave. I began to hallucinate. I saw faces in the corners of my eyes, fleeting shapes with the same jagged grin. I heard voices repeating my name, whispering encouragement, threats, commands. The apartment was no longer mine. It belonged to the smile, and I was merely its occupant, subject to its patience, its cruelty. The presence became almost tangible. I could feel it pressing against the walls, crawling across the floor, even when I sat completely still. Objects shifted slightly. Doors I had locked were found ajar. My belongings moved, seemingly on their own. The smile was no longer just an image. It had spread into the apartment itself, into the physical world, into my perception. I began recording everything obsessively. Photos, videos, audio logs. Each night, the smile appeared somewhere new, behind furniture, in mirrors, across walls, sometimes even faintly etched into my own belongings. It had become mobile, almost predatory. The whispers became voices, low and deliberate. I could not understand the words, only the intent. Mockery, anticipation, menace. I stopped leaving the apartment entirely. I stopped answering calls, seeing friends, even opening my blinds. The grin consumed my reality. My days became a blur of observation, cataloging every appearance, every shift in its expression. It had no eyes, yet I felt watched. No mouth, yet I heard laughter and whispers. I was convinced that looking at it directly made it stronger, and ignoring it made it creep closer. Sleep deprivation left me disoriented, confused. I began seeing it in reflections everywhere: windows, polished floors, camera screens. Sometimes it would appear for only a fraction of a second, enough to make me flinch. I realized the smile was patient, calculating, waiting for a moment of weakness. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that could not be bargained with, reasoned with, or escaped. Years passed. The smile became a permanent presence. It was everywhere I went, appearing in reflections, shadows, even photographs I took of the sky or streets. Its form evolved, teeth jagged, edges curling, faint suggestions of eyes forming in the darkness of its grin. It adapted to my fear, feeding on my attention, my dread. I realized the smile was not confined to walls or rooms. It existed wherever I was, as if tethered to my consciousness. I lived in constant vigilance. I avoided mirrors, reflective surfaces, windows, anything that might reveal it. I never slept fully. I survived on brief, fractured periods of rest. Every movement was measured. Every blink, every breath was a test. The whispers became commands, urging, mocking, sometimes screaming at me to look, to acknowledge it. I could no longer trust reality. The smile had infiltrated my perception, my mind, my life. I sought help from psychologists, paranormal researchers, anyone. No one could see it. No one could help. I was alone with it. Attempts to flee, to relocate, to rebuild my life elsewhere failed. The smile followed. It waited, patient, relentless, tethered to me, observing, understanding, evolving. Now I live like a ghost in my own life. I cover walls, avoid mirrors, shut windows. Yet sometimes I hear it behind me, feel its gaze, sense its grin stretching across walls, floors, ceilings. It is alive, patient, and I am prey. The truth I cannot escape. The smile was never painted on the wall overnight. It was always waiting for me. And one day, if I falter, it will claim me completely. I live in fear of the next morning when the grin may be closer, sharper, ready to step out of the wall and into my reality.